Hello there. Welcome to the Brianna Christine podcast, episode number 9. In this interview, I talked to Curtis Bailey, who works at an agency in Redlands, California. Curtis and I went to school together, and he was the kind of person who you just totally admired because he had great designs, and not only did he have great designs, but he had a great personality. He has a great personality. So I had to have him on the show, even though he didn't exactly fit into my common thread of freelancing and solo creative business owners. I really wanted to have him on the show to talk about how he manages his time and how he is super successful as a designer. So, things we talk about that are kind of fun. We talk about how you can use your commuting time while you're driving to work or to school as problem-solving time. We talk about how he had some experience working in digital theater projection, which is just really fun if you're looking for different ideas of how you could go into the design field. We talk about when to work with your strengths and when you should try something new. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. I know you're really going to like it, so let's go ahead and hear from Curtis. Hey everyone, I have Curtis Bailey with me here today on the Brianna Christine podcast. What's up, Curtis?
Not much. I am relaxed and I'm ready to talk.
Okay, so we recently graduated from California State University, San Bernardino, and my memory is that you were married, you worked a full-time job, and yet your projects always stood out in the class, but in a good way. How is it that you are such a force of nature when it comes to getting work done?
Well, first, thank you. That's very kind. I actually never worked full time during class. I was always a part-time employee, but I was putting in 3 to 4 days a week, kind of depending. But really, it was just a matter of, following through on the schedule, like knowing very clearly what those deadlines were and not waiting to do anything. And for me, that even included, my commutes, because driving from California State, San Bernardino to where I lived was oftentimes a 40-minute drive. And, that's 40 minutes of problem-solving time, right? I don't have a computer in front of me and I don't have paper and pencil in front of me, but what we do, all of this kind of visual communication problem solving is a lot of thought experiments to a degree. So, you don't have to be, in a studio to do work. So I try to make it a habit to use my brain time as efficiently as possible. And so then, when I got home and I had to, do the stuff like, maintain my house, maintain my marriage, and all that other stuff, that I wasn't, trying to cram in, a lot of mental problem solving in, the couple hours after, everything in the evening has died down and that kind of thing. So, it was a lot of that kind of hour by hour time management in a lot of cases.
Do you feel like that hour by hour time management is what keeps people from being as successful? They don't use their time as wisely?
I can't jump into other people's heads and say for sure, but I mean, that certainly seems plausible. I think that there's a line that I'm going to steal with no shame whatsoever that was delivered to us in our senior seminar, which I liked quite a bit. And I'm going to butcher the line a little bit, but it was to the effect of, artists and dreamers wait around for inspiration. The rest of us just get to work. And sometimes that really is it. If you are expecting, some kind of brilliant inspiration to suddenly hit you, and then that's when you'll be able to start working, then you're already too late in most cases. Because thinking about the problem, letting the problem, kind of sit in your brain and taking some stabs at it, even if it's just 5 minutes of sketching, it's that process that leads to inspiration. You're not going to conjure anything out of thin air without at least, trying to do some actual work first, at least in my experience.
Yeah. Well, do you find when you are struggling managing your own time, what is it that's coming up that you feel like is causing you to have trouble managing your time? Where do you get distracted?
It can be, for me, getting lost in iteration, where I want to test, 50 versions of something. And sometimes that's really good. Sometimes that's what the project demands, or the particular problem is kind of requiring because of how thorny it seems to be. But a lot of times it's just kind of self-serving exploration, which can definitely take, suddenly an hour goes by and you've done 50 variations of a thing that you're never going to use. So I try to liken it to doing figure drawing with a live model, because they'll sit you down in front of the model and she's going to be in that pose for 45 minutes. And once those 45 minutes are done, that's all you get. So you have to know that, okay, I have these 45 minutes in which to render something, and that really forces your decision making as you start tackling that drawing about the level of detail you're going to include. What do you want it to feel like? It really is about allowing the constraints, including your own kind of time management, to drive the creative process.
Yeah, I find that to be true for me too.
Yeah, very much.
Well, I was hardly surprised to hear when you were hired to work with our professor, Andrew Oakes, at his design studio at Green Acres Advertising and Design. What is it like to work around such talented people?
The main thing for me about being there is that there's a lot of learning by observation that I can do, not just in, looking at projects that they've done in the past, but just kind of seeing how Andrew and some of the other people on our team tackle going for solutions to things. And, anytime that I see one of them approach something in a way that maybe I wouldn't have thought of, it's a little piece that I can file away and, kind of integrate into my decision making process and problem solving for future stuff.
I love that. I remember getting a little bit of that when I worked at Associated Students Incorporated. So I can only imagine that it's just even better at Green Acres.
Yeah, well, and there's one thing that happens a lot with it too is that because this isn't a situation you and I would have experienced together at school, where we had a fair bit of our own leeway to make a lot of decisions and maybe even spend time doing a lot of background work on projects. Here there's a matter of, hey, there's a deadline, there's a client that's waiting for it in 1 day or 2 hours or whatever it is, and that really forces you to focus and kind of lean on quite heavily on what as well as just trusting in your team and what it is that they know how to do, so that you can deliver the right solution, but also efficiently.
So for instance, when you're working with everybody else, do you guys ever like butt heads? What do you do if there's like a conflict or?
The disagreement over solutions is a natural and I think pretty healthy part of working on any project, and particularly a situation like this where there's going to be several hands involved. You want that level of interaction and back and forth, because for one, as great as any one individual designer or problem solver may be, you're not going to think of everything, and so it makes it really valuable to have people who are both able to tell you no and also provide like really strong rationale for why. And I think that's probably the critical difference, because just a simple thing of like, I don't like this, that's not particularly helpful. But if it can be articulated why it might not be suitable for this particular project or for this particular client. And then that really kind of lets you open up and, see whatever it is you're working on in a way that you probably may not have otherwise.
Yeah, well, that segues perfectly into my next question, which is, can you explain your main role as the project manager at Green Acres? Do you have others that work under you? What's your position?
Well, yeah, there's a small handful of people that I wouldn't really say that I have people under me necessarily that I have. There are designers that I feel like that I serve in service of them. That my job is to make sure that they know what it is that needs to be worked on, what the specs are, what it is that the client has in mind, and to a degree guiding some of the creative direction. But that's also kind of an all hands on deck thing with most of the work that we do. Everybody is familiar with what it is that is happening that the client needs, or at least can provide valuable input, even if they don't have direct background with that client or that project. I like to make sure that everybody is well informed about whatever it is that I've asked them to work on. But then I do a lot of the nitty gritty behind the scenes managing of our CMS, our content management system, and the job queue, and making sure that things are completed in a timely fashion, setting up milestones, and just following through on deliverables, print jobs, and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit of everything, but mostly I just try to keep all of the plates spinning.
So which parts of your education do you feel like come into play in your new role at Green Acres, and how much of it do you feel like comes from past experience from other jobs that you've had?
I think that the job I was working at prior to starting at Green Acres was a managed IT services company, and I worked in the account management side. So there was a lot of similar duties that I had there that involved scheduling things, talking to clients, making sure that team X, Y, or Z was doing what they need to be doing in a certain time frame. So it was surprising but very gratifying to me that experience actually came into play for me working at Green Acres. But when it comes to my school experience, it's just some of that stuff that we were talking about earlier about knowing what the deadlines are, what the direction is from the quote unquote client, and searching for solutions that work for what they need, and not just trying to satisfy my kind of like personal impulses, because as commercial artists or graphic designers, we really aren't doing personal communication. Not that we don't put our experiences and other things into the work that we do, but we're not fine artists. We're not out there making some kind of commentary in the world about how we feel about a social issue or something like that. We're solving communication problems.
Yeah, and that's what I love about design, how it's so different from art.
Yeah, it's. I think there's overlap, and there should be overlap, because I actually do have a studio art background prior to being at Cal State, and I think that stuff has informed the way that I think about solutions, or the types of solutions perhaps that I come up with that maybe somebody who didn't have a studio art background wouldn't consider. But at the end of the day, I think it all kind of still goes into the same funnel, and that is, what's the right communication solution for this problem for this client.
Right. So you kind of have like the tools of the artist, but you have the mind of like a communicator and a designer.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. And I know you also had an internship with a theater to create digital set designs. Are you still pursuing that in any way? Or was that just kind of for fun?
Well, it's not something that I'm actively doing right now, but I actually did do one other show with that same director after the first one, which was for the Pasadena Opera. I did another show on campus, actually, that was an operetta where she needed basically the same stuff, some projections that would go behind, because they don't have huge budgets for these things a lot of time, or the settings, the operetta or whatever it is taking place in is a little bit too complicated for them to build full sets for. So that's one of the great things about having the option now to do stuff like projections, is that you can quickly and efficiently set a mood or a time and place for the audience to kind of pick up on, and then they can understand where they are in the story and focus on what the performers are doing. So yeah, that was a whole lot of fun doing those, and I'm still open to more of those jobs.
Yeah, I think that would be fun just because I just like to watch theater shows. So,
Yeah. And I've seen some more. I actually went with my wife a few months ago to see, I think it was the very last weekend that they were doing Wicked at Pantages.
oh, I
And
love that. I love Wicked.
it was a great show, and they used some projection to enhance certain scenes. Even if it was just the suggestion of rain is with some lines that were streaking across all the set that was already there. They didn't have to completely redo everything that was already on the stage. Just that one little thing gave the audience the sensation and the mood of that particular scene. So yeah, it's a pretty powerful tool, and it was fun to play with.
Yeah, and you also created like the poster for that show, and then you created the digital set. You kind of like have like this wide variety of experiences that you can draw from when you're designing something.
Yeah, I enjoy that aspect. I like getting my hands dirty and everything. I mean, on that last show that I did, there was also a piece of set, like an actual physical. It was supposed to be a counter that they used at the hotel, and that needed to be painted. And I suggested doing a little design on the front of it to just kind of help, you know, sell the environment and give it a little bit more visual interest. So yeah, it was fun wearing all those hats, and but again, I feel like it all comes from the same thing, and it's that visual communication of finding the right thing that will suggest the mood that the story needs, or whatever that might be. I think that it's all kind of, again, it goes into the same funnel. It's like, okay, well, as long as we know what we're trying to say and communicate, then the solutions come out of that, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Would you say that designers who are afraid to like try new things, like, oh, I can't make digital sets because I'm a poster maker, I'm a logo maker, would you say they're limiting themselves, or would you say it's kind of for each person? Maybe some people specialize and some people tend to wear more hats.
Well, I mean, I think it's valuable to try things, even if it's not something that you feel like you want to make a huge portion of your career or time spent out of. But a lot of growth comes from trying something that you're not sure you can do, which was a hard lesson for me to learn, but a really, really valuable one that I try to lean on and remember as often as possible. That nobody ever goes anywhere by saying, I'm not going to try that. But at the same time, I think that there is value in knowing your strengths, specializing, honing those, because then, when the time comes that a particular project or a particular client needs something that falls under the umbrella of that thing that you do really well, then you can go in there and kill it. And that's also, a lot of fun to be able to kind of stand on that and know that you specialize in that thing and you can deliver.
Yeah. I just feel like it's so hard sometimes, particularly for me, to feel like I specialize in any one thing because I just love trying everything.
Yeah, I mean, Lord knows I've only barely touched some, video, which I'm a huge cinephile. So anything that has to do with, that level of communication where, suddenly now time is a factor that, does putting a pause in, the video before you cut from this shot to that shot, make it feel one way or the other. And, how does that, serve whatever it is that you're trying to communicate. And that aspect of it is, to me, is really fascinating. And I find that I notice it more and more anytime that I'm, watching commercials or film or anything like that. So yeah, I kind of want to dabble in all of it and see, which ones to pursue further so that maybe they can become a future specialization.
Yeah. So you're saying you could specialize in multiple things?
I think so.
Yeah. I think some of us feel like, we get stuck. Like we don't want to specialize because we feel like we're going to be stuck.
If you think about to go into our own field, for example, think about a guy like Saul Bass. Certainly he was a guy who was probably quite adept in a lot of different areas, but he's not known for being a typography designer or anything like that. The things that made him special were his corporate ID work and the things that he did in motion graphics. He almost was responsible for giving birth to animated movie title sequences with the work that he did for like The Man with the Golden Arm and Psycho and various others, and that was a specialization for him. And it's that work is fantastic today, still, like 60 years later.
Yeah. Well, talking about doing multiple things, multiple creative pursuits, occasionally you will post on your blog, and I liked your latest post on logo larceny because it's so hilarious and true to life for so many of us. How did you overcome the loss of such blatant dishonesty when your classmate who ripped off the official logo for is it Gonzaga University?
I think it's Gonzaga, but
Gonzaga
Don't
University.
quote me on that. To give some context here, that I had done my elementary school wanted the kids to draw mascots for the Bulldogs, which was what my grade school mascot was. And so, of course, I liked to draw even at that age. So I was like, I'm going to draw a bulldog. I'm going to make it the best bulldog I can. And I submitted my bulldog, and they picked some other kid's bulldog. And the other kid had actually traced the Gonzaga University bulldog. Of course, I didn't know that at the time when I was 8 years old. And it was only many years later that I first saw that logo for that university. And I was like, my life turned upside down almost. I was like, I can't believe that I thought for years and years and years that this other kid just drew this amazing, like professional looking, beyond my comprehension when I was 8 years old, bulldog. Like, how did he do that? And sure enough, it's a bulldog that he copied, and it is a bulldog that I have seen copied many, many, many other times in many other places by, a lot of other companies and high school football teams and everything. And the thing that's fascinating to me about it now to look back as an adult is that it really does kind of show how, we kind of inherently seem to understand good visual communication because it is a really good bulldog. I mean, that is like the stereotypical, obvious way that a bulldog for a sports team should look. And, the artist, whomever did it, probably should feel pretty good about themselves because of how perfectly it seems to work, and that everybody recognizes it and wants to use it. So, I mean, it's fascinating to me in that regard.
Yeah. I love that post so much. I read a book on storyboard illustration because I don't know, I just thought that would be fun to do maybe. And I read that this guy had been drawing his whole life, but he started out by tracing everything. And he didn't draw like a free-handed figure for like years, but because he had traced his whole life, when he went to do it, he was like way better at proportions. And I thought to myself, to think I like beat myself up for my whole life because I couldn't freehand a figure right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, what that guy was doing was basically he was training his understanding of proportion and what, kind of layout of the human body. It's kind of like Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours of practice will make you an expert at anything. So yeah, I mean, most art schools would probably never tell you to learn by tracing, but the human brain does what it does, and that's pretty. I haven't heard that story before. That's actually pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's just called The Storyboard Artist, if you ever want to read it, if you're ever interested in learning something new.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and storyboarding that's another thing. Again, with me being such a movie buff, that I like all that stuff that goes on behind the scenes in preparation for that kind of storytelling, because they do a lot of the same kind of problem solving. Like, what's the efficient way with this one shot? How do we position the characters?
Mm-hmm.
What's the lighting going to be like, and does it reinforce whatever this narrative point is? So it's pretty awesome. I love that stuff.
Yes. So some of us are in the design field because we want to do what we love. How do you feel about what you do?
I do love it. I have somewhere packed away in my keepsakes one of those pieces of paper that they teach you to write on when you're a grade schooler. The big fat dotted lines.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, "I like to draw. I want to be an artist."
Oh wow, that's so cool.
And I was probably 5 years old at the time. So this world, that what we do, has always made sense to me in a way that pretty much no other discipline has. And there's lots of things that I love. I'm way into history. I'm fascinated by a lot of the physical sciences, but to delve into those takes a lot of work, and kind of expending effort against my understanding and inclination. But when it comes to visual communication, it was always a world that made sense to me. Like, if a new concept was introduced, I was often immediately able to go, "Oh yeah, I see exactly what you mean, and I understand now, how that applies." And then suddenly it opens up a new, world of possibilities for me. But it was always within the realm of stuff that I got it.
Mm-hmm.
And which isn't to say that I don't work at finding new ways to do things, because obviously nothing comes that easy, and I always want to find ways to improve what I do. But it's fun living in this world. I like being a part of it, and I really can't picture myself doing any other kind of discipline. I think this is for me.
Then you and I are one and the same, because I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah. It's. I mean, you kind of know it when something clicks with you, and it's not, again, like I was trying to say, it's not a matter of automatically knowing everything, but it's that maybe it's the sense that you automatically want to know more because you get it and you are excited by it. That's fun to be able to spend hours a day doing it and make a living at it. It's I'm very lucky.
Yeah, we are both lucky. So, where do you draw your inspiration when you have free time?
I think that, well, I mean, for one, working with the people that I do lends a lot to that. Again, like I was trying to allude earlier, I try to file things away, stuff that I see and hear at work, and trying to solve a particular problem. Just seeing how other people tackle it is a great kind of source of tidbits to put in the Rolodex, as it were, and be able to use those later. But also, just I think staying tuned to life. I've found that there's a lot of things that are analogous across disciplines. What works in graphic design as communication, in some ways, is not that different from what works in music, or what works in film, or what works in literature. I feel like there's a lot of cross-pollinating going on there. So I just like to stay as attuned as I can to the arts, and I think it all kind of filters in. And even just going outside and looking at the sunset for 5 minutes and allowing yourself that time to live in the world and not being worrying about what a deadline is or what problem it is that I had with the cable company today or any of that stuff. Just trying to be tuned in to the world, I think, is a big part of it for me.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. I've heard so many artists talk about if you're going to be really great at what you do, you have to have all parts of your life in balance. So I feel like when you talk about how you need to pay attention to the world, it just speaks to that same thing that I've heard from those other artists. One last question. What advice do you have for designers and other creatives that might be interested in working at an agency?
I think the first and most important thing is that although the stable of skills that you bring to the table, like knowing how to use design software or have a good understanding of design principles and all that kind of thing, that all that stuff is obviously super important. But if you're applying for a job that asks you to do those things, then anybody that your potential employer is going to consider is going to have those same qualifications. So the important extra thing that I think anybody needs to focus on is themselves. What do you bring to the table as an individual? What are you going to be the kind of person they want to work with? Are you a good communicator? Do you have a stable of interests that keep you, attuned to things other than just whatever task is, on your plate on Monday morning? Those kind of, humanist skills are understated sometimes in how important they are.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me today, and I hope you have a good night.
You too. Thanks, Brianna. And I really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah. Maybe we can have a follow-up interview sometime.
Yeah, let me know. I would be more than happy to.
One last thing. Could you tell me where people could find you if they want to connect with you?
Yes, you can find me on the internets at curtisbaileydesign.com.
All right. Well, thanks again, Curtis. Have a good night.
You bet. Good night.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Curtis Bailey of Green Acres Advertising and Design. And if you would like to hear more of these types of shows, please subscribe on SoundCloud. And if you would like to connect with me, Brianna, on social media, you can go to Instagram at Brianna Christine Designs, or you can go to facebook.com, Brianna Christine Designs, or you can go to briannachristinedesigns.com. And I will see you in the next episode.